What is going on at Newcastle United? Last year, it took Newcastle until March to lose their third league game of the season. This year, they have done it already. That is a 6-month swing. Now, look, part of the reason that they have lost 3 games already is because of the dazzling brilliance of Manchester City, because of the uncontrollable talent of Darwin Núñez, and because of this unpredictable guy who is going to the very top, Evan Ferguson. The fixture list wasn't kind to them and they have paid the price. But something really is not right with Newcastle. Look at the way that they concede goals now. There was a time about a year ago where we were talking about Newcastle as being one of the most miserly teams in European football. You couldn't score against them. They were so stingy at the back. They had this ruthless approach. And people were talking about Eddie Howe and comparing him to Diego Simeone. He'd gone over to learn from Atletico Madrid. And a lot of the way that Atletico Madrid used to defend was being replicated at St. James's Park. It took them what? They had 15 clean sheets in 26 games at the beginning of last season. Now, they've got 2 clean sheets in their last 29 games. Something has gone wrong. And today was a really bad day at the office for Newcastle United. It was easily their worst performance of the season so far. They were strangely meek. They were timid. And look, in the first 5 minutes, they looked brilliant. They were really lively. But aside from that, they were woeful today. And they lacked such an ingredient that you associate with Eddie Howe. They lacked any semblance of fight, heart, aggression. That's who Newcastle United were. Think of their performances last year. They were full of tenacity. They were horrible in the most positive way. When I say the word horrible, it has very negative connotations. I mean it as a compliment. They were an awful side to play against. Not today. And I tell you what, this international break has come at a really decent time for them because they were battered. And it wasn't all about Evan Ferguson either. Look, I'm going to wax lyrical about this guy. I think he's amazing. I love him as well. I love the way he conducts himself. I love the fact that he's so confident and so humble and so young. Not qualities that you often associate with youthful footballers of today's era. But he has it all. He really does. But today wasn't all about him. It really wasn't. I thought Billy Gilmour was brilliant. And Roberto De Zerbi talking about Billy Gilmour at the end, you could see he was just loving him. He thinks he's such a gifted footballer. And the strike, look, Nick Pope was at fault badly, really badly. And I've flagged Nick Pope. I flagged that I thought he had a ricket in him. And people laughed at me. But I just don't get it with him. I think he's a decent keeper. But I don't think he's anywhere near as good. But the venom with which Billy Gilmour hit that strike to open the scoring. I mean, he deserves us to acknowledge quite how good he's been. And De Zerbi was just loving Gilmour. But he wasn't the only one either. I think Pascal Gross ran the game. And he shouldn't have been able to run the game because Brighton were ostensibly overrun in midfield. Numerically, they were overrun. And yet Pascal Gross totally dictated the play. Newcastle couldn't get anywhere near that João Pedro either. It was just far too easy. I think Matoma is a beautiful footballer. Truly sensational. And I could go on and on here. Not one Newcastle United starter played well. Not one. And Brighton as a team, they are just truly exceptional. I think modern football can be quite soul-destroying in a way. Brighton are not that. They are just brilliant. And yet again, Brighton have won against the top 7 side. Yet again, they are sort of put in this charming performance. And today they totally outclassed Newcastle. A hat-trick for an 18-year-old. And there was a moment at the end of the game where he walked back onto the pitch. Obviously, he was substituted. And he had a sort of shy smile, almost a regrettable smile, almost an embarrassed smile. I just think he's incredible. Honestly, I do. No big celebrations. His temperament is perfect. And that is going to be so important to him because with his talent, he is going places. So his temperament is going to be key. And he really does have it. But from a Newcastle perspective, I think it's a really interesting... Brighton taking points off a good team. Yeah, they do that. De Zerbi outsmarting a good manager. Yeah, he does that. Tony Bloom proving yet again that his recruitment is perfect. Yep, it's what happens. But Newcastle are the story here because we know how good Brighton are. We know how brilliant and perfect Brighton can be. But from a Newcastle perspective here, trying to find positives. I mean, there was some maybe in the first half, but that was just way off what we've come to expect from Newcastle United under Eddie Howe. So many errors. So many moments where the judgment was incorrect. Like, so disjointed, so lethargic. That's the key. No energy. Do you remember all of that last year when Eddie Howe would talk about the intensity of the team? He'd use the word intensity all the time. And I think he had the word plastered on the wall. Our identity is our intensity. Well, it was your intensity, because there's nothing intense about that team anymore. There is nothing intense about the way that they played today. They were lethargic. They were quiet. And something wasn't right from the beginning. You know, there's lots of work to do for Eddie Howe. And I think, actually, he needs to take some of the blame. Like, look, I think Lewis Hall's a lovely little footballer, and I'm gutted that he left Chelsea. And I do understand why Newcastle United wants to sign him, but not as a priority. They desperately needed centre-half cover. It was so obvious that Newcastle United and Eddie Howe needed centre-half cover, and they didn't sign anyone. You know, they really need to hope that Botman and Shah's injuries aren't serious. They desperately need them back, because Dan Burn at centre-half isn't good enough. Simple as that. He isn't good enough. People don't, he isn't. We saw it today. We saw it against Liverpool. He isn't good enough. And I tell you what, a Burn and Lascelles partnership starting at centre-half in the Champions League is a nightmare for the Gallagate. So, look, signing Lewis Hall makes sense to me, but not at the expense of the players that they actually needed to sign. And look, we know that they're ahead of schedule. And by the way, I do think Newcastle are going to be fine. When you are this far ahead of schedule as they are, it creates problems. Man management becomes very important. Rotation becomes very important. But their defeats have all been to very good teams, I concede. But on some level, some of them are unacceptable. And the nature of them, rather than the results, the nature of them are unacceptable. Look, I just had a look at their fixture list. And after this international break, they have a really good run of fixtures in the Premier League. However, what happens then is they have midweek fixtures against Milan, Man City, Paris Saint-Germain, Dortmund. And overall, I think that if the relevant people hold their nerve, if Staveley doesn't panic, they're going to be just fine. But I don't understand what they are doing at the moment. Why didn't they sign a centre-half? It really doesn't make sense. So how this one goes, I did say that Eddie Howe could be under pressure, didn't I? I didn't necessarily anticipate it being on the cards this early. But for Brighton, they are just incredible. They dominated that midfield. The Newcastle midfield balance was all off. But the way that Billy Gilmour played and Pascal Gross, it was truly brilliant. There are some other questions about Newcastle as well. Gordon Almiron still playing, considering that they paid 40 million for one of the most efficient wingers in the league, and he's not on the pitch. It doesn't really make sense. But today it does actually belong to Evan Ferguson. 10 goals in his last 12 Premier League starts. I mean, Brighton are onto something truly amazing. And their ability to constantly regenerate. They lose Graham Potter. They're never going to survive. They do something better. They lose their player of the year, Cucurella. They're never going to survive. They bring in Estepinian, who's 10 times a player. De Zerbi, exceptional. Billy Gilmour, what a player. What business that is, by the way. £4 million. It hurts me to say it. £4 million he cost that club. An amazing footballer. Matoma gets into most Premier League teams. They are the most perfectly run football club in European football. And Tony Bloom deserves the freedom of the city if he hasn't got it already. Presumably, they are aware quite how lucky they are to have him. A truly brilliant result for Brighton. A terrible day at the Amex for Newcastle United. Will Eddie Howe get it right? That is going to be the question. Do you think Eddie Howe turns this around? Or let me know in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. If you're new around here, my name's Rory. I would love for you to click that subscribe button. Thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful Saturday night.